What will the Utah Jazz do with Jordan Clarkson? Can they move up in the NBA draft? And would you trade for Ja Morant? The headlining questions from another great edition of Ask LOJ. It's next on Locked On Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked On Jazz. Today is an Ask LOJ edition, so we'll open up the show taking your questions from the Twitterverse. And what you're looking at, the main questions that come in to start are about Jordan Clarkson. What will the Jazz do there? A creative one, as I mentioned, about Ja Morant and whether you'd be willing to make a deal for him. Then some more ideas for free agents before we delve into the draft options. And before we're done, we'll look at what Denver did to dismantle Miami yesterday. Truly incredible performance by the Nuggets. So we'll look at all those things. I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. To the everydayers out there, thank you so much for tuning in each and every day, and thank you for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. We are free and available on all podcasting apps as well as on YouTube. Good conversation yesterday on YouTube. Thanks to everybody who chimed in on the Coby Buffkin or Cason Wallace conversation from yesterday. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Quick note from yesterday's kind of conversation, as I mentioned on we had a conversation of Coby Buffkin and Cason Wallace on yesterday's show. I got to tell you, I love one of the comments. With Ainge dealing and Hardy developing, I have zero concerns about the draft. And that's, I think, the most exciting aspect of where we are as a franchise is just everyone's confidence level and the people that are calling the shots right now. It was pointed out by a bunch of people. Wallace went to 6'2.5" in the combine with a 6'8" wingspan, and Buffkin was 6'4.25" with a 6'7.5" wingspan. It's interesting, like, which do you think is bigger? Like, it's a kind of, they both have similar wingspans. They both originally were listed at 6'4". So it'll be interesting. Another person said, I'll be really disappointed if we take one of those two at 9. So that was interesting to see, kind of hear that perspective for the first time. I don't know who they think is better. And, you know, Anthony Black's name obviously gets bounced around a little bit there as well. So anyway, that was just some of the conversation yesterday on the YouTube from the everydayers that all took place. It's always good to hear everyone's comments, and we did in the community section of YouTube had a little vote going yesterday, and Cason Wallace outvoted Coby Buffkin 78% to 23% as the choice of everyone. I'm not sure. I really am not on that. I'll tell you what, I had fun, and it's actually one of our Ask LOJ questions today, which was going to be our last Ask LOJ question today, but is now going to be one of our first Ask LOJ questions today because I just pivoted, and it comes in. Let's just go to it right now. What does Mr. Boone do during the offseason? He plays a lot of golf and hangs out, but it was fun because yesterday I sent him, I don't know if any of you have ever seen Hoops Intellect, which does a really nice job with these player breakdowns, and I sent him a breakdown of Coby Buffkin and of Cason Wallace. He said, I'll text you after golf. 4 hours later, he said, I don't know who's taller. Defense looks really good on Cason. Very active. Can he shoot? Coby drives left, finishes well. In the footage, it didn't show him until he could shoot too late from those clips. Maybe I prefer Coby. I said, same height. Cason's 20 pounds heavier. And then we went back and forth. He's like, players can't shoot. Miami's strength is the number of shooters. We have to have shooters. And I think Ron's really right on this, by the way. I think that's actually something that is getting lost a little bit in this draft conversation right now is, you know, if we're learning anything, Denver's the number one shooting team the last 2 years in the NBA. Miami's got all these shooters, And I mean, I guess I'm excited about Amon Thompson and Asur Thompson and their great athleticism and all that. And I've listened, like, you got to be able to shoot. You really got to be able to shoot here. And if you can't shoot, you can't play in the playoffs. And if you can't shoot, you don't win. There are not. You look at last night's box score. We're not having many non-shooters on the floor right now. And even with all the shooters on the floor, the 3-point shooting last night I think was 22 of 66 or something. Like, not good. I think we were like dead at 20, probably less than that actually, 21 of 66. But Michael Porter Jr. is a good shooter. Aaron Gordon is probably the least good shooter, but Jokic, Caldwell Pope, Murray can shoot. Bruce Brown can shoot. Like, those are the guys playing. Caleb Martin, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Max Strus went 0 for 9 last night. Can shoot. Gabe Vincent can shoot. Kyle Lowry can shoot. Duncan Robinson can shoot. Highsmith went 2 for 4. Like, you just don't have guys that can't shoot playing at this point. So I think that's, when you're looking at these, really, when we're looking at all these draft players, I do have to say, like, I think Ron's exactly right. Like, this is what's so great about Ron, is if you're going to ask one question about any of these players, can they shoot? Is probably the first question that has to be asked each and every time. On what you think and how you feel about what they're doing. All right, let's go to this. Is a fun one to just start off with. It's not kind of on any of our themes, so it was just fun. 26 years ago this week, John Stockton hit the game winner in Houston to win the West. Is at the best moment in Jazz history. It's funny, as my dad was actually there. My dad's birthday is May 29th, and I used to give him, when we were great, I used to give him a present every year of whatever game. So he saw the Bulls, he saw that game, went to the Sonics, saw Game 7 when we lost. So I think that is probably the greatest moment, unless there was something in the NBA Finals. The Stockton to Malone pass would be, I guess, the only other one that maybe you would make being better. It's funny though, 26 years ago, I was in the building, sitting there on the. I saw Bowler post, like, I was on the baseline. I was actually left of. Surprised I wasn't with Bowler. I was left of Stockton, right there, like where the inbound pass came from in the walkway, getting down to get ready for the post interviews. When that shot went down. I mean, just in one of the most amazing nights I've ever had, coming back on the plane with all the fans there and everything. So, yeah, I think it probably is. All right, let's get to some more questions on more pressing issues. What are your thoughts on Clarkson? We all know he's going to opt out of his contract. Is he the Jazz number one free agent target? Will him wanting a certain number of years on the contract become possible that causes him to join another team? And what's another question, my follow-up question, is how likely is it the Jazz execute a sign and trade, extending the options for Clarkson, allowing the Jazz to get something for him? So, I mean, there's a few interesting things on Jordan. Let's just kind of back up. I think the Jazz had a tell last year a little bit. And so one is that the Jazz did not move Jordan Clarkson at the trade deadline. And yet, then Jordan hardly played after the trade deadline. So if you knew that Jordan was not going to play after the trade deadline, I think the trade deadline was like February about 8th or something like that. Jordan played like 5 games. He did have the hand injury, but he just didn't. Then after that, he just didn't play. So Jordan played, I think, 5 or 6 games after the trade deadline last year. Maybe even fewer, but right around there. So to me, that's the first tell from the Jazz, which is if he was only going to play 5 or 6 games, why didn't you just move him? Well, because clearly you want him back. Like, you want him to be a part of the organization. He's important to what we're doing. We believe in him. He has a little pizzazz to him. And he gives us, a scorer. You got to be able to put the ball in the basket. He really can do that. He also had just a fabulous year for us last year. So I do think in a limited free agent class that we talked about earlier this week, for the everydayers, you heard that conversation, Jordan's probably our top free agent. The other one that's interesting here, and I think this is going to be a rub for Jordan, is the teams in 23-24, according to Sport Track, with salary cap space are Houston, where I don't think he wants to go play. Indiana has some cap space. Detroit could have some cap space. Orlando could work this thing to have cap space. Like, there just aren't a lot of teams that are going to be having all sorts of cap space that are the types of teams that Jordan wants to go play for. So then to the question of whether we're executing a sign and trade, that actually seems maybe most likely. Is that if Jordan's not returning, you are trying to execute some sort of sign and trade to get something for Jordan. If nothing else, you're doing it with cap space since you're getting a trade exception. But I don't think when I look at the teams that have cap space that any of them are going to be particularly interesting for Jordan. Now, there's an interesting question, though, for the Jazz with Jordan, and that is against Ochai Agbaji. How many minutes do you want Ochai Agbaji to play next year? And how does Jordan impact that? So if you're somebody who thinks Ochai is a future starting two, do you really, and you want him to play 33 minutes a night, what's Jordan doing? Are you playing really small and you're playing Ochai as the three? Is Jordan coming back off the bench? I'm not entirely sure that after starting for an entire year and doing as good a job as he did last year, that Ochai wants to be, that Jordan would want to come off the bench for a developmental project. Right? If Ochai was better than him, maybe. When Jordan was coming off the bench, he was coming off the bench behind Donovan. So I think there's a bunch of kind of some really complicated issues here, actually, with Jordan. It's clear the Jazz want him. He brings a tremendous amount. He had a great year. He bought in. He did all the right things. So the complicated issues with Jordan are, one, what do you want out of Ochai next year, and how does Jordan impact that? Two, if you want, depending what you want out of Ochai, how does Jordan have a role in this team that he likes? And then three, quite honestly, is if Jordan, what does Jordan want? He's at a stage in his career where if he's playing for a team that's going to win 35 games, he probably wants to play 35 minutes. If he's playing for a team that's going to win 55 or 60 games, maybe he's willing to play 27 minutes. And the last one I would always remind you is these guys like to play. They like to play. They like to have the ball in their hands. They like to shoot. They like to have large roles. It's not as, to them, as horrific to play for 35 wins for 35 minutes. In fact, that's probably preferable by most players than it is to do it the other way, which is playing 25 minutes on a 50-win team. All right, we'll continue with the question of whether or not you would trade for Ja Morant at this point, and then dig into some free agent options and some draft pieces as well. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by my friends over at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. The Hyundais just keep award-winning cars coming out, and the Murdochs have 80 years of time in Utah to make sure that you get the best experience. And no regrets experience is the way that Blake likes to talk about. He wants to make sure that every single person that buys a car with Murdoch leaves with that feeling that they had a wonderful experience and they got treated well. My last service experience there was just top-notch. Just such great communication. They got the jobs done. Something didn't work the first time. They came back to take care of it a second time. It was just exactly what you desire. And that's the essence of who the Murdochs are. And the Hyundai car, you simply get more bells, more whistles for the dollar than you can get anywhere else. And you get the award-winning. The Ioniq 5 is the Motor Trend SUV of the year. 2 years ago, it was the Sonata that was the car of the year. Now the Ioniq 6 is the 2023 World Car Award winner for the World Car of the Year. It is so awesome. All of those are available for you at Murdoch Hyundai, 4646 South State Street, also in Logan and in Linden. Email me first at dlock09 so we can give you the VIP meeting over at Murdoch Hyundai. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel and Locked On have got a great deal for you. It's called the No Sweat First Bet with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get a No Sweat First Bet up to $2,500. This is how it works. $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. It's all at FanDuel, the safe and secure app. You get paid instantly. There's no better place to get all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, a no better place to get started with visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com's no/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Locked On. Boy, last night had you on a ringer. The line, I think, was 9.5, and by the end, the Nuggets win by 11. That would have added some excitement to the night last night, thinking you had that one in control, and then it kind of kept bouncing back and forth and all that. Crazy. Go get involved at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps. Thanks so much for taking the time. For next week, we'll continue our draft prospects, get all those kind of things looked at, get ready, watch the NBA Finals with you together, look at some more prospects. If you have guys you want us to look at, please let us know. I'll spend some weekend time doing that. All right, let's continue. You guys are great. So this was my kind of, my favorite kind of question of the day. Would you trade for Ja? I'll tell you what, I thought Adam Silver's comments yesterday, if I heard them correctly, were daunting. They were that we have discovered more things in our investigation, and we are not announcing it until after the NBA Finals because we don't want it to be a distraction. Well, it's clearly a distraction in my mind only if it's significant, right? So I do think I would I'd have to know what this is. But knowing what I know right now, I do think I would trade for Ja. I think the positives vastly outweigh the negatives. I think there's obviously some issues. I think he hasn't broken the law. He's endangered some people. He's done some things that put him in danger. I think they're all coachable. I think from everything I've heard about him at heart, I think there's a good person there. There's bad decisions being made, but there's a world of talent. So yes, I think I would trade for Ja at this point, and I don't think Memphis would trade him. So that maybe answers the question even better than anything else. All right, what do you think of Coby White as a free agent? This is obviously comes from a diehard basketball fan because I probably need to tell you who Coby White is for a lot of you. Coby White was the 7th pick of the 2019 draft. He played for North Carolina, 6'5", 195. He's not a point guard. He's a pure gunner. And my answer is yes. So he's been in the league for 4 years. He's averaged 27 minutes a night. He shoots 37% from three. As I mentioned, I don't think he's a natural assist guy. He's probably like a young version of Jordan Clarkson. At 6'5", he's got positional size. He can score. He can shoot and he can score, which is what we were talking about earlier, I think is important. He's played, like 2 years ago, Chicago played him almost exclusively as point guard. Last year, they swapped him so that he played half point guard and half shooting guard. And all of his on-floor, off-floor numbers got better. I thought his overall play got better last year. I thought he looked more comfortable. His numbers went down. And maybe I actually like that a little bit. That when I think they showed his shots per 36 minutes went from 15 to 12. And maybe just more controlled. His 2-point shooting was up 5 percentage points. His 3-point shooting stayed. He's a great free throw shooter. So yeah, I think this is an interesting player. And I like, you're playing the second draft on player here. You're taking a guy who was the 7th pick of a draft. He's clearly wildly talented. And in the 2019 draft, he, and then one thing I always like to look at on drafts, if a player hasn't hit, has anyone behind him hit? Now, this one gets a little interesting because Jarrett Culver ahead of him didn't hit. Jackson Hayes hasn't hit. Rui Hachimura's only kind of hit. Cam Reddish hasn't hit. Cameron Johnson has. PJ Washington, Tyler Hero, Romeo Langford, not really. Sioko Dimbayu, no. Chume, okay, no. Nikhil Alexander, no. Like, there's a chance that was a 5-player draft. Zion Williamson, Ja Morant, RJ Barrett, DeAndre Hunter, Darius Garland, and then that's it. I always like to see how many players after a player have hit in a draft because it tells me kind of, I believe in the draft analysis of people. And so it tells me a little bit if like this guy, if the 5 guys below him have hit and this guy hasn't, I bet he still has a chance. It's worth doing with Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody for the Warriors. Like as you look back on those draft picks by the Warriors, are they ready to like have other players around those 2 players stepped forward? Moody was the 14th pick, 15th with Corey Kispert, 16th with Alfred Şengün, 17th was Trey Murphy, 18 Trey Mann, 19 Kai Jones, 20 Jalen Johnson. Like not totally, right? And the guys in front of him are Zaire Williams, James Bouknight, Joshua Prima, Chris Duarte. On Moses Moody, that one makes me a little nervous. And frankly, on Jonathan Kuminga, there's not a lot of guys behind him. That draft might have been Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, Evan Mobley, Scotty Barnes, Josh Giddey, and Jalen Suggs. And then Jalen Suggs is a question mark in there. That draft might have dropped at 5. So I do think that's sometimes one of the things to look at on that. But I do like the Coby White question. Draft question: should the Jazz draft at 9 or trade back for even more picks? So, the only reason the Jazz should trade back is if they have a player that they know they want, that they can get, and they somehow gain another asset for it. That they really want Cason Wallace at 9, but they actually look at the draft board and know he's going to be at 13, and they trade back. It's a risky way to live because somebody can trade in between. We don't need more draft picks in this draft. We don't need more assets in this draft. We already have 3 first-round draft picks, which is too many. It's more likely that the Jazz would like to take 9 and 16 to get to 5. Ben Anderson, I was on with Ben Anderson and Jake, and Ben kept trying to use the 28th pick. I don't think that's as likely. I'd love to, but I don't think you can use the 28th pick to get where you're going to want to get to in the draft. I think that's too difficult, and I don't think the 28th pick has much value. So now, can you trade? Do you have player? If you have, Danny Ainge's most famous is he trades back to 3, knowing he's going to get Jason Tatum, and he gets another pick, and they take Markelle Fultz, and he actually had who he wanted. So that's the reason you trade back, is that you actually know you're going to play. It's a super risky way to live in a draft where there's player movement, where there's trades going on, though. Do you think the Jazz will trade up in the draft? So that, I think, is the more likely scenario. Can you use 16 and 28 to get to 14? Can you use 9 and 16 to get to 7? The one thing is that teams like Orlando and Indiana that are ahead of you already have a ton of picks. Washington's interesting because Washington wants the same thing you want. Washington's really a problem. Can you do something with Washington where you give Washington 28, move up to not 8, just to make sure you get the player you want and they get another pick? We have all these other future assets. Those are harder to trade, and you have to be really diligent about when you're going to use those. What are the Jazz chances the Jazz could trade 28th pick to Miami for the 18th pick and either Lowry's contract or Robinson's contract, the 28th pick, and a later lottery protected maybe 2026? So this is really interesting. And actually, we'll have our Locked On NBA mock draft, and this is actually what I did with the 28th pick of the draft. I just did it with Brooklyn. There was a player that had slid who I almost drafted at early. I actually made a bunch of trades coming up in our mock draft. And so there was in my case, Brooklyn, trying to get under the luxury tax, has 21 and 20. So I swapped up to 21, I think it was, and took Patty Mills' contract off of Brooklyn's books. So I do think this is a very good and possible scenario for the Jazz, where you use the 28th pick and your salary cap space to pop back up to something in the mid-20s just to get a player that's sliding. The other one that gets interesting there is whether or not you can do it in a manner, that allows you, and you do it beforehand, and and now all of a sudden you're playing with 21, 16, and 9 as you try to move up. Like, that would be what would be interesting to me. It is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Thanks very much for making today Locked On your first listen of the day. 3-day Summer League packs are available at utahjazz.com right now, so make sure you jump on those. We'll look at the NBA Finals here in a second, but some more good questions coming in. This one's a big picture NBA question. Has the NBA shifted away from having a one true point guard? I consider a true point guard a ball in hand and predominantly initiating the offense. Are teams just spreading the responsibility among multiple guys? Why pick Cason Wallace if the teams are moving away from a true point guard? So I'm not sure I think teams are. I thought when we had Mike Conley last year, it was really obvious the value of that. Phoenix using Chris Paul, but also Devin Booker as a ball handler, I think had a primary. Denver certainly has a point guard. His name's Nikola Jokic. He just has to be 7 feet tall, but the ball's running through his hands, and Jamal Murray is their secondary ball handler. And doing that at a pretty high level. Miami, when Kyle Lowry's on the floor, probably Miami's one that's moving it around a little bit more on who's handling and how they're handling. But Gabe Vincent's probably close. So I still think you have a primary ball handler and organizer. It's why I like Cason Wallace is because he's not addicted to the basketball. So you can play kind of a free-flowing. But I do think it's important that you still have a settling force there. Frank Boston turned it around 2 years ago when they were 20 and 21 because they actually let Marcus Smart play point guard and kind of moved away from that. So I actually think that that's fairly true. I don't actually think that's true. I think that you have more versatility in your other positions, but I still think you need somebody conducting. Please run some geeky numbers for me over the last decade, or how often does a Game 7 end up losing the next series? So this has actually been out on the internet. I didn't run it. I think it's teams that play a Game 7 only win the next series 41% of the time. It's a huge issue. I mean, you go to 7, and I do think that, yes, you're in for it a little bit. And I think we're going to see that in the series. All right, let's go back to last night for a second. There were some numbers I wanted to share that I thought were crazy. So first thing, my number one takeaway watching last night is in the first quarter, Denver feels to be like Denver's scoring every single trip down, and they never ran the same play twice. Like, they just came out and had a different variation to every play at every moment. 8 minutes into the game, their offensive rating is a 137.5. The opening 8 minutes of the game, they're 137.5. They are, and if you look back at their shot distribution at this point, Aaron Gordon has 8 shots, which you'd never expect. They're just pounding him down low. Jokic has not taken a shot. Michael Porter's missed 2. Pope has 2. Murray has 4. They're 10 of 16. They haven't hit a 3. They have 2 offensive rebounds on their 6 misses. They have 6 assists on their 10 field goals. 8 minutes into the game, their offensive rating is a 137. Now, 138. That could be altitude preparation. That could be anything. But it was stunning. The end of the first quarter, their offensive rating is a 117. Not talked about. Their defensive rating is a 91. Jokic now comes back on the floor. If we go to the 6-minute mark of the second quarter last night, and Denver's offensive rating is a 126.5. And the only time it is when Bruce Brown and Christian Brown were on the floor. Their offense wasn't great, but in the 4 minutes Jokic had sat at this point, their offensive rating was actually just as good, which was crazy. Their defense was terrible. Their defensive rating is a 102.9, but 18 minutes into the game, their offensive rating is a 127 last night. These are crazy numbers. This is actually why I don't care about what happened in the fourth quarter last night. At halftime, their offensive rating is a 130. 130 is Denver's offensive rating at halftime last night. 24 minutes into the game. Their defensive rating is a 93.3. We probably should be talking about that way more. And now let's go to the 4-minute mark of the third quarter, which is right about when Jokic goes out. So now you've had kind of peak Jokic at this point. Jokic has now played 27 of the available 32 minutes of the game, and their offensive rating is at a 123. Their defensive rating is still at a 96.8. Denver is unstoppable offensively, and I don't know what Miami does to try to counter that. I really don't. But I think the bigger story, and that's probably the Game 7 fatigue that was just talked about, is how good that offense was, or how good their defense was. That will not last. But the 120 offense really might last. And Miami just doesn't have the firepower on 4 times in 7 games to get to a 120 offensive rating. And I think to beat Denver in the playoffs, you have to have a 120 offensive rating, which is an astronomically high number, and tells you a little bit about where the league's going. All right, that is Locked On Jazz. Have a wonderful weekend for all of those like myself who are having graduations this weekend. Congratulations to you and your family. Have a wonderful time. We will talk to you on Monday. Enjoy the NBA Finals game on Sunday, and hopefully get some good weather and enjoy yourself. Have a great one. Talk to you soon.